Hello, I'm Andy Schmuckler. I think that if you're interested in what the situation is with Israel and Gaza, with Lebanon, with Iran, and the whole Saudi Arabia in the background, um, I think that listening to me struggle to understand this increasingly complicated situation will be worth your time and worth your while. It'll at least be, I hope, interesting. I find the subject interesting. I'm monitoring things very closely. I'm going to Google News Israel every, I'd say 4 times a day right now, because there's so many uncertainties about how things are going to be unfolding. I'm wondering, what are the Israelis really going to be in there and out of there in some kind of a fairly quick order? They say they don't want to occupy, but there's history bit back here. Are the Iranians or the Hezbollah going to go in some sort of really serious retaliation effort against Israel for all the ways that Israel has been scoring off of them with almost zero cost to Israel in military terms? They've crippled Hezbollah and inflicted serious damage, and they didn't destroy it. Hezbollah is on the ropes in some sense, and it's not clear in how many senses. Anyway, there's so many unknowns right now. I can offer you no clarity. I can just share with you some of the ways I struggle to understand this thing. And I had a fairly clear position. I'm basically pro-Israel, as in I believe in the right of that Jewish state to exist. I would like for it to be governed by its better selves and not like these days. But I think it's a noble thing for Israel to exist. And what we need is a world in which Jews and Palestinians are each getting what they deserve and are able to live in peace and security. And how you get from here to there has been a question that's stumped the world for over 70 years. But that has to be the goal. I'm pro-Israel. I think it's got a lot of wonderfulness in it. But the other thing is, throughout this Gaza thing, I've been completely lamenting that the very worst elements of Israel are in control at this very crucial moment. And I have thought and continue to think that the way they dealt with Gaza was jumping into the trap that Hamas set for them, contrary to not only monstrous in its execution, as it has looked to the whole world, but also destructive of the long-term interests of Israel because of the reputational damage that they're doing, and accomplishing really relatively little, and not being accompanied by any kind of other countervailing things like cleaning up the situation in the West Bank with the settlers that you could do at the same time as if you had to ignore the penalty paid by a human shield in Gaza. Okay, well, at least signal that that's because of the necessity that the survival of your nation requires that innocent people be sacrificed, innocent people that the other side put in harm's way in order to protect them with the human shield. Anyway, I think that what the Netanyahu government did, the decisions that they made, not that I know what I think they've been terrible, just terrible. And I've been ashamed and I've been in pain that Israel has behaved the way it has in a variety of ways, stemming from the nature of the coalition that happened to be governing Israel on October 7th of 23, when the Hamas launches terrible atrocity against Israel. So pro-Israel, anti-Netanyahu, and a regime in which he's been held hostage maybe against his will, maybe not. Who knows what he wants? But he's held hostage by the Jewish Nazis, Jewish nationalists, that threaten continually that if he does anything contrary to the kind of fascistic approach to things, they will bring down the government. And Netanyahu is himself at least a sociopath who's been willing to sacrifice the political well-being of Israel for his own self-serving purposes. I think he's perpetuated the war in Gaza because that's how he stays in power. Anyhow, that's how I come to this situation. But we're in a new situation now. That's what's interesting. Now, first of all, Netanyahu, who was way down in the polls immediately after October 7th because people held him responsible, rightly so in some ways. His popularity is now leapt up. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it is said in the Israeli press that the polls show that he's had a big increase in popularity, because that's what you get when you strike your enemies and you're successful. I mean, he and the IDF are pitching virtually a shutout lately. From the way they've been able to assassinate their targets, starting back some months ago, but especially accelerating now, and the thing with the pagers and the walkie-talkies and killing the head of Hezbollah, destroying a whole lot of weapons, evidently not so many that Hezbollah might still make a big thing out of this. But it looks possible right now that Netanyahu and the hawkish approach they've taken to the border may have actually achieved something of some value. Ugly as sometimes things are, part of the ugliness of this situation is that fundamental, I think, to understanding what's going on is that a very large and important country, Iran, has determined long ago for its own ideological and other geopolitical strategic ideas, a way of extending their power, for one thing, that their goal is to wipe Israel off the map. So I know that it's very hard to talk about Israel in a country, in a world where a lot of people have a lot of opinions that I don't think are very well founded. But Israel was legitimately founded, and it has continually been in a situation where there are powers that want to wipe it off the map. We've not seen that kind of wipes a nation off the map stuff. Maybe what Putin's doing in Ukraine the last couple of years represents that kind of a thing. But Israel has had to exist its whole life with the knowledge that first the whole region and more recently Iran wants to wipe it off the whole map. So it helped to create Hezbollah, it helped to create Hamas, it helped to create the Houthis, all of whom are throwing destructive forces at Israel. That encircled Israel and that launched that thing on October 7th. And who knows whether the Iranians signed off on that. I gather that people think that the Iranians didn't sign off on that atrocity, but they are all allied in this Iranian access to destroy one of the world's nation states. And it's also a nation state that has, in terms of its political culture over the course of its life anyway, I mean, it's kind of ugly now with the fascistic forces gotten so powerful. But over its history, it has been a shining light in the whole region of democratic and humane values. You look at Egypt, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, Saddam Hussein, Assad, the dictatorship, Mubarak in Egypt, he wasn't such a monster. Women can't even drive in Saudi Arabia. I mean, Israel was a bastion of some of the better, more humane, civilized, democratic system of justice. I have another video called The Tragedy of Israel, if you want to go look, where I talk about how the experience of being besieged in some of these ways for the entirety of his existence, which goes back a couple of years after I was born to 1948, that the cumulative effect of that and all the stories that have unfolded from it, including Yasser Arafat walking away from a decent proposal that might have taken the region in a better direction. You look at that and you see that Israel has become more broken culturally and politically. It's given birth to a settlers movement that I don't think is a credit to the values of the founders. Not that the settling necessarily in itself is such a thing, but the kind of people who would conduct pogroms against Arab villages. That's the fascistic form of the impulse to have Jews come back into a land that a lot of religious people regard as central to their history and identity, whatever the governing structure should ultimately be. But we see that there's so much ugliness in that. And the way that the Israelis have treated the Palestinians ever since Yasser Arafat, well, not quite, but pretty much for more than 20 years, giving up on the Palestinians. I don't think you can ever afford to give up. The only future worth striving for is one in which, even if you don't see how you're going to get there from here, you know that's where you got to get. So you do what you can to get there. And the way the Israelis have been treating the Palestinians, as challenging as that is, you could do a lot better. You can treat people, you can give people more space, more room that doesn't necessarily have a cost to you. There are things you can do that aren't necessarily increasing your risk, and there are some risks that are worth taking, confidence measures and such. But, you know, particularly under this current sociopathic prime minister, he had no interest in doing that. And in fact, it is widely understood that he was strengthening Hamas with his policies and undermining the Palestinian Authority, which, as terrible as that authority may be in this way or that way, is the only thing to deal with. And if you're not going to deal with that, then to create something else that you maybe could. Maybe there's a Palestinian, what's a South African, you know who I'm talking about, the guy who was in prison for so long, and then came out and turned out to be this beautiful human being. I hear there might be such a guy in Israeli jails. But in any event, find some route forward. But the Israeli government has not had shown least bit of interest in cultivating a positive connection to help the process of building toward a better future. But Israel does have truly legitimate security concerns. Here's a major power. What do the Iranians have? Well, it's a huge country, much bigger than Iraq. And it's got a population of, less than 100 million, but more than 70 million, I think. And it's got an unpopular regime, which is destabilizing the region because of its, whatever the impetus is, not just to live and let live, but they're challenging for regional dominance. I would guess that if you looked into the spirit of Ayatollah Khomeini, you would find fascistic elements in the consciousness, like the way they make women hide themselves with morality police. But along with that, there is a lust for power, which is part of the fascistic pattern. But anyway, I haven't looked deeply into it. They are playing for more power. And they've extended their power into Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon, Hamas up against Israel where they could attack across the border and kill more than 1,000 people in ways that are designed to be as offensive as possible. And that's Iran. They are on the threshold of having a nuclear weapon. Won't go into the Trump the treaty that Obama negotiated and Trump backed out of. Pretty sure that treaty was better than where we are now, but in any event, the Israelis are fighting for their lives. And so there's a part of me who is pro-Israel, that's willing to sort of accept and hope for this new Israeli aggression to actually achieve something worth achieving. I mean, the cost is high in innocent life yet again. But when a region is threatened by a major cloud of possible war between Israel and Iran, both of them possessing nuclear weapons, the Israelis already have them, there's a big gain to be had if you can take the world in a different direction. And though I don't like that it was Stalin who said you have to break eggs to make omelets, sometimes you do have to break eggs to make omelets. I don't trust these particular egg breakers. I'm worried that that these fascists that have been making these terrible decisions in Hamas are maybe not making such good decisions with the Hezbollah thing. But so far, they look like they know what they're doing. They've been impressive. Yet, where are we going to be in a week? Will there be a bigger war? Or, and here's one of the big unknowns, has Israel, first of all, is Israel banking on having intimidated Hezbollah and Iran from striking back in any meaningful way? I don't know if it is remarkable how restrained Iran has been. One reads about how they're the hawkish faction and a more dovish fashion. The new president is essentially what they call a moderate, though, however, you still have to get past the supreme Ayatollah guy. But anyway, he actually has been apparently already having a restraining effect on the Iranians reflexively trying to demonstrate their dignity. And but on the other hand, there are great costs, everybody seems to say. If Iran takes this blow where their primary instrument in the Middle East, I mean, Hezbollah is much more powerful, much bigger than Hamas or the Houthis. They are the big ones. And if they allow Israel to essentially inflict significant damage on it without any compelling the Israelis to pay any great price for that, that changes a dynamic in the Middle East and maybe in a good direction. It was the case if you would ask, well, what is it you want to achieve in this situation, going back to October 7th? And I would have said that, well, as things unfolded, what I wanted to have achieved is that this Israeli government would fall. I mean, I didn't want to have to wait till the 2025 elections when they have to happen. I wanted it to fall, and what could precipitate its fall? And then I wanted Joe Biden to play more hardball, because I thought a pro-Israel policy is not to support this regime, and by continually giving him all the weapons he wanted, even when he was flagrantly disregarding what Biden was saying he wanted as a way that this thing would unfold. His taking the money and ignoring the council should have led to some kind of leveraging of the superpower, using its leverage to influence the party that needs its support. never did really understand why Biden wasn't stronger. I wasn't the only one. Thomas Friedman, um, I think Max Boot in the Washington Post. Why didn't he use the leverage to get the Israeli government to do what was really in Israel's interests, whatever that might be? But Biden clearly didn't think it was in the American interest for the Israelis to behave that way. It's not in the interest of American democracy if it costs the Democrats Michigan. Because the Arab vote will not vote for an administration whose policy essentially gave a blank check to an Israeli government that didn't do the right thing. Didn't seem that way to much of anybody, like the right thing. So those are the things I wondered then. But now we've gone beyond the issue of how do you deal with Gaza and Hamas. That's already been dealt with in a very discreditable way. But the most democratic nation in the region, threatened by an aggressive threat from an almost nuclear regional superpower, has the right to fight to relieve the pressure on it that's being applied by that big power, by Hezbollah on its northern border, that's rendered the northern part of the country uninhabitable, so that between 60 and 100,000 Israeli citizens have been, since the beginning of this Gaza crisis, because of the Hezbollah barrage of rockets every day, have been compelled to leave their homes in the cities like Kiryat Shimona and Kibbutzim. They've had to flee to the cities like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and live in hotels, and the Israeli government is saying that a central goal here is for Hezbollah to stop bombing the north so that these people can come back to their homes. And that is a legitimate thing to insist upon. The whole question of whether how you deal with human shields is difficult. I find it very difficult because I'm a bleeding heart liberal. I have basically dovish instincts. But the realities of power I don't blink from, and sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. And if Israel felt a case might be made that a nation in Israel's situation, where it is beset by one much larger Hezbollah, terrorist organizations that are continually working to be destructive of Israel and trying to wipe it off the map, have both enmeshed themselves in a civilian population in Gaza City and in Beirut, so that you have a choice. You can either strike at your enemy and kill innocent people, because you can't just hit the one without hitting the other because they're so enmeshed. Or if you don't hit the enemy because you don't want to kill innocent people, then you're endangering your survival, however much you want to estimate what the costs are of allowing the enemy to exist as it does. Well, Hezbollah seems to have miscalculated how the Israelis would regard the costs of the low-level daily exchanges that were going on for so many months? Or was it because of the homeless people, or is that just a good excuse for we're in a position now to smite our enemies and weaken them so much that the balance of power in the region might be shifted? And there are articles out there that I've been reading that people think this might shift the balance of power in the region. But then there are also a lot of other articles that are written about, like David Ignatius has something in the Washington Post today, in which he recounts some of his long history of over 40 years covering the region. And he points to all kinds of ways in which the Israelis have miscalculated and thought that their military might would allow them to escape this situation. It's possible that this situation is different and they are going to address it differently. For example, they say they're not going to occupy Lebanon. Well, that differentiates it from some previous things that didn't work out very well. So I find myself at the moment giving up on the idea of getting a decent government in Israel. For the time being, I would prefer to have good things happen for Israel's campaign, because I think on the balance, the world will benefit from it. And I think the world pretty much agrees. The United States, I think, agrees. Biden seems to have changed his tone to not just supporting but complaining, but more, yeah, do that. So, and the British seem to be on board in some ways too, because Iran, I think, is seen by the powers on the better side of the world as a negative force. It threatens our interests, which is part of, which doesn't make them necessarily evil. They want American power out of the region. So they're an opponent in that kind of very physical way. But they're also a force, you could arguably say, is part of what that old axis of evil. This is not a pretty regime. They are not helping the world become what you would want the world to become. And so those countries like the United States and Great Britain that have had some vision of establishing a more peaceful world, they may complain about Israel and its defects. But right now, the more important issue is what can be done about the threat that Iran poses to the order of the world. And we can see that when the Iranians retaliated against something that the Israelis did, I think this is back in April, with a barrage of over 300 missiles, that a variety of nations joined with Israel to block that attack, so that basically hardly anything got through. But the point is that Israel was in the doghouse of world opinion, deservedly so, at least in part. Well, deservedly so. But nonetheless, when Iran became the power that Israel was dealing with, the UK, the US, and Jordan, and maybe the Saudis, constituted a kind of air defense system to disable that Iranian attack. So the realities of power here, and the Iranians are not the good guys. So it might be that, though I hate to hear about the civilians that are dying in Beirut when these surgical strikes don't hit just one person. Nonetheless, in terms of the realpolitik of how world history gets shaped, this may not be a high price if the benefit is actually to help advance in the world more world ruled by law rather than world at war for the long haul. And that's how I see this right now. The Israeli regime may be defective in some very troubling ways. But there's a lot of intelligence also operating there in designing. I mean, what they've accomplished in the last several weeks is astonishing to the world of national security and espionage and all that. They are really good at what they're doing. And let's just hope that there's some equally good judgment that's governing how they're going to proceed. I think that the first sign will be how fast do they get back out of Lebanon. They can destroy a bunch of tunnels maybe, or anyway, how surgical will this be? How much will this be sort of completing or further completing the job of dismantling the threat that Hezbollah has threatened Israel with from the north for 20-some years? Or the Israelis going to show a complete lack of restraint? And one of the things David Ignatius talked about was, well, not just unintended consequences, but a kind of hubris, a failure to understand how much risk is entailed in plunging into the unknown. So we don't know whether the way the Israelis are going to conduct this thing, whether it's going to be well designed. No, quit while they're ahead, right? Keep on doubling down on a roulette table until they lose. And we don't know whether the Iranians will do something which could lead the Israelis to be just as aggressive toward Iran. It just sounds like, from what how the Israelis are talking, they're ready. If Iran wants to pick the fight, they're ready to have it out with them. That seems to be indicated. Netanyahu just gave a actually rather nice speech to the Iranian people. I mean, he's thinking a regime change, and he knows it's an unpopular regime. One hopes that they know what they're doing. Because misjudgment in such a matter could be catastrophic at a whole lot of levels. So what should a guy hope for? Well, I hope that the Israelis will be entirely rational in deciding where to stop, not take any unnecessary risks, and that the Iranians will absorb the blow without picking a fight that they don't want. That's my hope.